Folks, I want to begin my message today. I want to start off with what I've called my message today, okay? I've called it a dance, a demand, and a dead prophet. Now, I know that sounds a bit dramatic, okay? And I didn't choose it because it was dramatic. It's very, very honest about the story we're going to look at in the Bible today. But to start us off, I don't want to go to the Bible. I want to talk about another event. In the 1960s, in America, there was an experiment which became known as the Milligan experiment. And I want to tell you briefly about what that was. So there were some psychiatrists, and they wanted to explore the human capacity for being influenced by other people. So what they did is they decided they'd organize an experiment. So they gathered a bunch of volunteers together, and they portrayed to them that the experiment was this. They wanted to experiment with and see what the effect of punishment was on learning. In other words, if someone wasn't learning and got punished, would that help them improve their learning? So they didn't really understand the full nature of the experiment, but that is what they were told. So these volunteers were all brought together, and 3 at a time went into a room privately. Now, this is the way experiment worked. One of them was the head of the whole experiment, so he wasn't a volunteer. He was in charge. One of them was a genuine volunteer who would occupy the role of teacher in that group. And the other one was said to be a volunteer, but he wasn't. He was an actor. Have a look at this picture here. Okay, this is it taking place. So what they did was this. The actor was strapped to a chair, and a wire electrode was attached to his wrist, and he was attached to a shock machine. And the way it was designed was this. The teacher, who was a genuine volunteer, was given a list of 30 questions that he had to ask the person who he thought was a volunteer, but was in fact an actor. And every time he got a question wrong, he would be shocked. So the voltage started at 75 volts, and it slowly worked its way up to the absolute maximum of 450 volts. Now, prior to it reaching 450 volts, the machine was designed to give out a warning: danger, severe shock. That would come out between the 300 mark and the 450 mark. That would begin to sound. So generally what would happen is this actor was primed on how to respond. So initially, in the early stages of getting things wrong and being shocked, he would twitch and jerk and feel uncomfortable. As the voltage began to increase, he would get severely distressed, complain about his heart. As it built up to the 300 mark, he would be screaming in agony and pain and thumping on the wall and begging for them to stop. And all during this time, if the teacher, who was the volunteer, began to be very hesitant about increasing the shocks, the head of the experiment would calmly say, no, the experiment requires you to continue. You need to continue, just very calmly. So they did this experiment to see how these volunteers would cope with the pain they were allegedly inflicting, their own conscience, and this person telling them what to do. So before they actually started this, they got hold of 40 psychiatrists, and they did a survey. They explained to them what the procedure was going to be, and they asked them, please evaluate this. Please give us your prediction on how many people you think will get up to the 300 mark when it began to get serious and there was screaming and pain and crying. And what percentage do you think will go the whole way to 450 volts? So they did research amongst themselves from their understanding of human personality, and they came up with these statistics. They said they believed 3.7% of that group only would get to the 300 mark. Most would stop and refuse. 1%, only 1%, would go as far as the 450, which was the threat of death. So they undertook this experiment. Guess what the results were? 66% went all the way to 450 volts. 66%. And it was a devastating conclusion for them about the power of influence, that people will go contrary to their conscience, contrary to their own values, in the face of suffering that they caused because of the influence of other people. Now, folks, this is a rather devastating illustration of the power of influence that people have over us. And I've brought that up because the Bible story we're going to look at today, and the theme I'm following, is this theme of influence. So before we even crack on today, just for your own reflection in your own life, think on your own life. Who's been a good influence in your life? Who's been a bad influence in your life? But don't stop there. When have you been a good influence? And when have you been a bad influence? Okay, maybe you can keep those things in mind as we begin to look at the subject, and we begin to, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at this incredible and devastating story in the Bible about influence, and then we're going to try and pick out what we've got to do in response to this, all right? So, folks, we're going to start off in this very dramatic story. We're going to work through it bit by bit, okay? It comes from Mark chapter 6. So we're going to get stuck into the story, and we're going to pick out the relevant parts for us. It's a story about influence. Have a look at this. For Herod sent soldiers to arrest and imprison John as a favor to Herodias. She had been his brother Philip's wife, but Herod had married her. And John, this is John the Baptist, had been telling Herod it's against God's law for you to marry your brother's wife. So Herodias bore a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But without Herod's approval, she was powerless. So Herod respected John, and knowing that he was a good and holy man, he protected him. Herod was greatly disturbed whenever he talked with John, but even so he liked to listen to him. So let's pick out the characters in this story. So here we have King, this irreligious leader with no particular faith aspirations or inclinations, but he had something of a conscience. Because this man, John the Baptist, used to pitch up at his door and put his finger in his face and said, you should never have married that woman. She was married to your brother. You're not permitted to do that. And he didn't despise him seemingly for that. And there was something in his heart that somehow connected with some of the things John spoke. And he wanted to listen to him. So he had something of a conscience and an awakening in his life. His wife, on the contrary, had a completely different approach. She had it in for John the Baptist and was out to kill him as much as if she possibly could. Now, just to tell you a bit about this woman, if you go to historians who were alive at the time, they said she was a ruthless woman after position and power. And she had married her uncle for the first marriage. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if she got rid of him or if he died. And then she married her second uncle because she was climbing the ladder into power and position. So here we have this rather not nice woman, a king with a conscience, and this very godly and holy and good man called John the Baptist. Okay, let's press on with the story. Herodias' chance finally came on Herod's birthday. He gave a party for his high government officials, army officers, and leading citizens of Galilee. Then his daughter, also named Herodias, came in and performed a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. Young, seemingly innocent girl who danced pretty well. Ask me for anything you like, the king said to the girl, and I'll give it to you. He even vowed, I'll give you whatever you ask, up to half my kingdom. Here's this possibly pretty, athletic, young girl who could have asked for anything to change her life. She was unsure What do I ask for? Okay, let's crack on with the story. She went out and asked her mother, "What should I ask for?" Her mother told her, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist." She's a nice lady, this. Kind of lady you'd like to go and have tea and coffee for, provided she hasn't got a dagger in her back pocket, right? So the girl hurried back to the king and told him, "I want the head of John the Baptist right now on a tray." Then the king deeply regretted what he had said, but because of the vows he had made in front of his guests, he couldn't refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner to the prison to cut off John's head and bring it to him. The soldier beheaded John in the prison, and he brought his head on a tray and gave it to the girl, who took it to her mother. Let's think it through. Here's an innocent girl who goes to her mother, who's filled with hatred, and her mother deposits her hatred in the heart and mind of her innocent young daughter. She bears that influence and goes and becomes the agent for a good man's murder. She didn't personally arrest John. She didn't personally accuse him. And she didn't have murder in her heart. But she carried the request, and that was enough. A prophet was murdered. She took an action rooted in someone else's grievance. Do you know, folks, I think there's a lot to be learnt from this terribly tragic story and from the Milligan experiment, which we've heard. We need to be very careful who we listen to and who is advising us, because wrong influence can lead to a lifetime of regret. Very often, as we've seen through this story, through the influence of others, we can carry offenses that were never our own. Not every voice speaking into our lives deserves to influence us. And if we borrow bitterness from other people, we can destroy innocent lives and be pulled far away from what God has for us. So it's a very dramatic story about influence. So what do we do, folks? Bearing in mind that the territory we've covered so far indicates very, very clearly that you and I are vulnerable to being influenced by other people. We are. So what do we do? What are we supposed to do with that? I've tried to pin it down in my head as the way forward. I think the first thing we have to do and realize, folks, is this, that influence is one side of a coin, as usually truth is. There's always the other side which you have to factor in. And for me, influence is one side of the coin, credibility is the other. They have to go together. If there is influence on one hand, there needs to be credibility on the other. If we are influencing people, we need to have credibility. If other people are influencing us, they need to have credibility. Let's just think about definitions-wise, okay? What is influence? Influence is the capacity to shape thinking, behavior, and direction in the lives of others. What is credibility? Credibility is the trust earned by character, consistency, and conduct over time. Right? Got it? That's what credibility is. So there needs to be credibility if there's going to be influence. So we've got to be able to answer the question for ourselves, what does credibility look like? And then we've got to build that credibility into our own lives so that we, who are also influencing others, can be a credible influence. And folks, I think we've got to keep that in our mind constantly through this, okay? Not only are people influencing us, but we are influencing people. It's just standard, okay? We are being influenced, and we are being an influence. So what does credibility look like? And how would we build that into our lives? Okay, let's begin to build this now and have a look at this in a concrete kind of way. All right, I'll show you where we can start, just as an intro. Proverbs 13, verse 20, the Message version says this: "Become wise by walking with the wise. Hang out with fools and watch your life fall to pieces." That is a direct implication of influence. That if you associate with good, credible people, their influence in your life will be good. But if you hang out with the wrong crowd, their influence will have an influence on you and it will affect your life. So it's just a standard, okay? Influence is going to happen depending on who you hang out with. Right, so let's talk about credibility. What does credibility look like? I'll tell you where I want to start. I want to start in John chapter 14, verse 1. This was a statement Jesus made, okay? And he said this: "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me." Now, folks, we need to frame that in a way that we can grip what's actually being said. If I stood up here this morning and I said that statement, folks, I know there's a lot of drama going on, but don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust God and trust me. How many of you would have a warning bell going on in your ear immediately that I said those words? Hands up. Absolutely, 100%. Any human being that comes up and makes a statement that says, "Hey, trust God and trust me," I would run a mile from. Because all human beings are subject to failings. There is only one possible way Jesus could say that categorically in good conscience, and that was if he was not 100% credible. Correct? So credibility is only ever found in this one man and how he lived his life. And so we've got to be able to condense his life somehow into some things that we can embrace for our lives to build that level of credibility as well. Okay, so I'm going to run through three things that for me are foundational in the way he lived, that I believe need to be foundational in our lives if we ever hope to have credibility. All right, let's go with the first one. Hebrews 13, verse 5. First part of this verse I'm not so interested in, it's the second part. "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you.'" Now, folks, that statement is a categorical promise from God for every single person who puts their faith in him. That he swears he will never leave you. He will never forsake you. When you see a statement like that in the Bible, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, why was it said twice? Is it because just poetic? Why would you say something in two different ways? It's to make a statement and to make certain that this statement has absolute clarity in the hearts and minds of those that are hearing. Those two words are similar but different. The word leave points to withdrawal, stepping away, just not being so present anymore. He said, "I'll never withdraw from you. I'll never turn my back on you." Forsake is deeper. It carries the sense of abandonment, desertion, or cutting someone off. He said, "I'll never forsake you. I'll never cut you off, desert you." How many of you have been deserted, forsaken in life? You'll know what that feels like. I think there is no greater pain than being abandoned, forsaken, and rejected and cut out. So the first thing God says, at a relational level, He will never treat us that way. He's reassuring us that He will never do that to us. And so folks, when you see this, for us, why do we trust Him so much? It's because of this one first and important reason, because He is devoted to us. And He will never leave us or forsake us. He is devoted to you and to me. And folks, do you know what? The only security we can ever have in any relationships is through that one quality of devotion. It's the only time you're ever secure in a relationship is if you know someone's not going to walk out on you. And so it stands to reason that His credibility rests first and foremost on that one quality: He will never forsake us. And when you look at the Bible, folks, when you begin to see how the Bible encourages us with that, to build credibility in our lives, it is full of that same quality. Look at this, Romans 12, verse 10. It says, "Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves." So at the heart of our relationships within a church, the same value is built in. Be devoted to one another. Don't forsake one another. That if we're to build any level of credibility in our lives, we have to be devoted to one another. And folks, you know, this quality, I think it's the same quality in our homes, same quality in our friendships, the same quality in our workplaces and in our church. It's everywhere. And as an immigrant, I would like to say the same devotion to the nation that's accepted you in. So important was this quality. Look how the first church leaders wrote about it. Have a look at 1 Corinthians 16, 15 to 16. This was Paul speaking to members of a church, and he said this: "We know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. I urge you, brothers, to submit to such as these, to people like this. Let them influence you, and to everyone who joins in the work and labors at it." Do you see what they were doing, folks? They were smart people. Do you know what they said? Make sure that you're taking influence from the people who have a demonstrated track record of devotion. Those are the safe ones. So if we ever want to have influence in the lives of other people, we have to be devoted. We have got to be committed to one another, and we have to be all in. There's no other way. And you know, folks, see this issue of devotion when Jesus said God will never forsake us. Do you know what that means for all of us here today? Every single one of you is so important to God that He has vowed He will never forsake you. That means every single person, no matter who they are, no matter the size of a church, whether it be a big church or a small church, every single person in any one of those churches matters to God and deserves devotion. And we have to be an expression of that to one another. Personally, I think if Christians jump from church to church to church, every time something displeases them, I think it's very unlikely that they'll ever build meaningful credibility in their lives. There comes a time where we have to be devoted. We have to be there for the long haul, and we've got to work through things. And for all of us, it's our track record in this regard that matters. What is our track record? Do we have a track record of being able to commit to people and seeing it through the hard times, difficult times, and being devoted? Or do we just jump ship? Have a look at this verse. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, "Many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find?" Just points to this difficulty of actually finding people who follow through with that. You know, folks, I'll be honest with you. Okay, there have been so many times in my role as pastor here, in my Christian life, when I've wanted to quit and walk away. Do you know, one particular time a number of years ago, I just wanted to run. And I heard about my pastor back in Zimbabwe. So he had been in the church about 30 years when I arrived. And by this time this had moved on, he'd now been there over 40 years in one church. And he'd had a terrible post-surgery complication where he had a clot lodge in his spine and it paralyzed him from the armpits down, so nothing from the armpits down worked. It was devastating to everybody who knew him. We prayed for his healing. It never happened. So he ended up in a wheelchair. Nothing worked from there down. Everything had to be tubes and pipes and enemas and all sorts of things. And I heard a story that our church always used to hold a conference up in Zambia, rural Zambia. No hotels, no Airbnbs. And they'd asked him to go and speak. So he got a car, learned how to get controls on the wheel, and he drove to Zambia to go and speak at the conference. And I looked at that and I thought, dear God, such loyalty, such faithfulness, such unflinching devotion. So folks, for me as a person, I have clocked in my life the people like that. My pastor who nurtured me in my church, he was in one church for the same length of time, 40 years. Michael Rollo, who we've had to speak here in this church. Why do I go to him for counsel and advice? 35 years in one church. It's what I look for. And that's what we should endeavor to be. Loyal and faithful and devoted to people. Have a look at this verse. It's pretty convicting, but it's true. 1 John 4 verse 20. It says, if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he's not seen. So what that's saying is, we may all profess love for God, but the only way to prove if that love for God is real is to see if we love one another. So what that basically means for us is if we can never be devoted to one another, if we simply can't do that, but we claim to love God, we're barefaced liars. We don't love God. So it's the acid test of our faith in God and our love for Him is whether we can love one another. So number one, devotion. Let's crack on. Okay, the next two come together. Mark 10 verse 45. Jesus himself saying this, he said, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Two things he stated he had come to do. Number one was not to be served, but to serve the well-being of other people, that he would give of himself for the well-being of others, serving. And the second, to give his life as a sacrifice for the lives and the well-being of other people. Service and sacrifice. So we've got three things here: devotion, service, and sacrifice. Let's talk about service. I want to take you to a verse which I think is absolutely outstanding for you and I, folks. It was talking about how to have credibility and influence within a local church. The same thing would happen in a workplace, even in a home. And it's this verse, 1 Timothy 3, verse 13. It says this: those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing. They gain an excellent foundation for their faith and their influence in the communities that they're in by serving well. So folks, do you know the best thing we can do to earn credibility in our own lives is to be this one thing throughout our lives: a good servant. Do you know, I remember hearing someone say this, folks, and it's proved true in my own experience. And they said this: if someone comes to you seeking a position, watch out. If someone comes to you seeking to serve or bear responsibility, promote them. They'll bless you. And it's true. It's because if we have the same heart as Jesus, our first position will never be to seek status and position. It will be to find a place of service. How can we serve other people? That's how we develop a heart like his. Great servants make great leaders. Poor servants make poor leaders. That's just the principle. So we've got to find ways of serving one another so that we bear that in our own lives. Okay. Lastly, sacrifice. Okay, Jesus said, I've not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. Do you know, folks, when you look at the cross and the way Graham shared communion this morning, the one thing that you pick up from that when he said he'd come to give up his life for the well-being of others, we see the price he had to pay was a huge price. Sacrifice is always costly. So if we're called to lay down our lives for one another, which we are, listen to this verse, John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. If we're called to be an expression of that sacrifice by sacrificing ourselves for the well-being of others, then we have to realize that's going to cost us. It means other people matter more than my comfort. It means that I'm willing to sacrifice things that are valuable to me and important to me for the benefit of other people. Listen to these statements. They are profoundly true. Faith that never costs us anything has never truly learned to love. Because love is always willing to pay a price. Where there is no cost in faith and service, there is no love. Only comfort dressed in religious language. Listen to this one. Without sacrifice, love can't be distinguished from self-interest. With sacrifice, it can't be mistaken for anything else. And you see what we learn in life? True love is always sacrificial. And we only know if love is there by sacrifice. So folks, you know what I've learned? I've learned to clock the people who, in my world, have demonstrated devotion, who've served well, and who've lived sacrificial lives. Those are the people I go to. Okay? And that's what we have to build in our own lives to be a credible voice so that we influence people well. We're all influencing other people. We are. Let's make sure we do it well. With all this being true, folks, what we should be praying, every one of us, we can pray this through the year, would be this: Lord, make my life believable before you make my voice influential. Right? Lord, make my life believable before you make my voice influential. Amen.